Hello, welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing my 25.7 jungle Tierlist. So, if you content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a huge amount of changes towards the jungle this patch. In fact, we had a hotfix to some changes within the patch, and then a follow-up hotfix because those changes didn't really land where they wanted them to, and Yorick ended up being a 58% win rate jungler, which is like one of the most absurd win rates we've seen for a very long time. Alongside that, though, we've seen buffs towards the likes of Ivan, Volibear, Shaco, Trundle, Olaf received an adjustment, which was obviously a buff in the end. Brand received a buff towards his jungle clear. We also saw nerfs towards Darius directly. Lilia received an AP ratio nerf to her E. Gwen received a nerf towards her Q base damage and W base resist down, and the ratio going up slightly. Then the Fury received a change, which was like focused on trying to get her weaker for jungle and weak, slightly like neutral in lane, but ended up being just an overshoot altogether. They've quite heavily swung at Neferi in the hotfix nerf to the point where she might even land as like an A/B tier jungler. Yorick is still the big talking point though, and I will cover him when we get to that stage of the tier list. So the D tier is going to consist of the same champions plus one. Brand is being bumped onto the D tier. He had already, I mean, a lot of his play rate had declined through like just direct nerfs towards the champion. He was very heavily underperforming. Still saw some level of competitive play. Like there were people like Yike, I believe, who was bringing him out every so often, but not to good results. This champion was really quite in a dire spot. They buffed him up this patch. Not enough. He's still underperformance for the average player. He's still mostly going to be used as like an AP flex pick. Maybe you can bring him out every so often. Not a pick I'd really recommend for just grinding it out in solo queue, but is there as an option once again. The likes of Skarner is a must avoid at the moment. This champion is in a terrible spot for solo queue. An incredibly pro-gel champion, like which is still seeing a decently large amount of pro presence, was being quite comfortably the lowest win rate champion in solo queue. Work needs to be done here, but yeah, Skarner, another pick I would really recommend avoiding. Maokai, another pretty heavily pro-gelled jungler. They should probably shift his power more into scaling rather than just flat damage on camps. This has really led to a lot of issues where his clear doesn't accelerate a huge amount, but his base value in CC always enables him to have some sort of value. And if you opt into things like Leandry, you can still clear relatively decently whilst getting access to that CC and vision control, which his E provides. Also having one of the strongest ultimates in the game. Things need to shift around to really bring this champion some balance in jungle whilst maintaining some level of support and top integrity. Gragas is a champion which just isn't really supported in the jungle at the moment. It's really unfortunate because I know there is a player base around this champion. He is just weak. That is the nature of the champion at the moment. He does have a skill ceiling, a pretty steep skill curve, and if you are willing to put the time in, you can still get results, but he's definitely just on the weak side at the moment. Silas, counterpick, really struggled after being directly nerfed and adjusted not too long ago, trying to push him more towards health builds. Really hurts his snowbally playstyle within the jungle, hurts his ability to get like the itemization to accelerate his clear in a manner which like really enabled him to play in jungle. He is just weak as an option now, and also not really supported as a pick in his current state. Rengar and Nidalee are just your elite skewed options. These two champions aren't banned by any means. In fact, if you can pilot them well, they are two of the best jungle options accessible to you. You have to pilot them really well, though. If you pilot these picks poorly, you will underperform compared to just some of the other options within the D tier. So definitely put the time into these champions if you do want to climb with them. If you're not willing to put the time in, they are must avoids. I would never recommend picking these champions without just the games in depth with them. The C tier then leads off with Kiana, who I also don't think is a bad jungler at the moment. She just requires a decent amount of depth and mastery to really enable her to thrive as an option here, and wants to be quite accelerated with her clear, getting like early kills and making sure you can snowball those advantages. Tilia is weak. She has some level of elite skew, but not to the same extent as some of these other options. She just isn't in a great spot for jungle at the moment, and that is quite unfortunate. Sejuani is a pro-gel jungler. She still provides insane utility, kind of akin to like your Maokai's, but has had some level of like levers pushed back towards solo queue, giving her some health ratios did help that. especially if you opt into like the Heartsteel variant, so you do aggressively scale a bit better. Still not a scaling pick, still want to be able to really spike as like a mid-game like enabler option within solo queue. Rek'Sai underperforms at the moment. We've seen some level of movement towards Youmuu's kind of akin to the Hecarim at the moment, but still just not in a great spot. Could also probably do with being buffed, especially considering a lot of her base is focused around OTPs, and new players aren't really encouraged to pick her up in her current state. Ivan bumps up to the B tier. This champion obviously received a pretty hefty buff this patch. It's a buff which is going to last until level 13 on this champion. Getting access to more CC early is an incredibly elite skewed pro buff. It's a complete blunder of a buff. In fact, like, I think they went completely the wrong direction with this champion. He was underperforming for average play. Like, that is a fair analysis. Riot did catch on to that, but they went about buffing him in completely the wrong way. I think this champion still isn't amazing for solo queue, but in competitive and elite, where you are like guaranteed to be able to play around someone, this champion is going to be one of the best options accessible to you. Olaf is a solid jungle option now. I've bumped him into the B tier. This pick is still unpopular, like relatively, like quite aggressively unpopular, but has seen a competitive game now, and hopefully that gives some like awareness to this champion that he can be a functional option here. The E cast time really does help him within the jungle as well, especially when you are spamming that ability off CD, getting access to it more frequently as well. I think Olaf is a pretty slept on jungler in his current state and is definitely warranting a B tier spot, at least at the moment. Could possibly even be an A tier as we see more games being played of this champion. Some of the other options here include the likes of Elise, who probably sits towards the high end of the B tier. She did get nerfed and it did affect her quite heavily, but she is definitely not a terrible option. She just requires obviously some level of depth and snowballing to really get ahead in the game. Zed is another mid to jungle option. He is in a relatively solid spot, one of the fastest clears, if not just outright the fastest clear in the game. Zyra, if you can like accessibly use her free time well, like once you like, or downtime well rather, where once you've cleared your camps, you're able to get harass in lane, invades, doing objectives, and just making use of that tempo advantage. This pick is an incredibly powerful option and does see competitive play, rightfully so. In solo queue, you can sometimes struggle. I don't think this pick is quite as cut and dry, and yeah, it's about how you use that downtime, which can really make the difference between a bad Zyra and a good Zyra. In the case of Rammus, I think this champion is in a pretty bad spot. The shining light of this pick is if you get access to it late, it can be really good in certain spots, and it is a very easy champion to play, but it's clear slow. His objective taking is even slower. Formo is a bad item, and he really only comes out as like a late pick within draft to really get a good amount of value. In the case of Udyr, he's fine. He obviously has depth to him at the moment. You can play AD, you can play Leandri, like AP Bruiser or build. I don't think this pick's amazing in his current state. He's definitely suffered from some of the nerfs he's received more recently. Sits as more like a B tier option in his current state. Eve is a fine champion. I wouldn't say she's one of the shining lights of the jungle at the moment, but if you are very comfortable on this pick and you are very good at snowballing like an early Medjay's, this champion is in a decent spot in her current state. Lee Sin, the premier jungle, or like most popular jungle pick, still very solid if you are willing to put the games into him. Very early game skewed, and you just like, it's all about how many games you put into the champion. Lee Sin is one of the hardest picks to master in the game, and if you can make use of his full kit and get value out of him and like snowball and close out games early, this pick is still an incredible option. He probably isn't like in one of the best spots he's ever been in, but yeah, still a very solid option if you put the time into playing him. In the case of Hecarim, people have moved over to the Youmuu's builder, and it is definitely doing a lot better. He now sits as probably a high B tier option. I'd say Elise can kind of sit towards the high end of the B tier. Both these champions are definitely doing a lot better in their current states. In the case of Talon, he is one of the best elite jungle picks in the game. For average play, he maybe not underperforms, but isn't like one of the higher performers at the moment. He's just an average jungler. If you can snowball your advantages, this pick can also be a very effective way of climbing. In the case of the likes of Belveth and Kindred, they are very elite skewed picks. I mean, Talon is another pick kind of around this area, where it's about how you make use of your time, your gold advantages, the early game invades, and then, yeah, snowballing these advantages to be really dominant and strong within games. You will always notice the difference between a good and a bad talent, and that's how they make use of their gold, their time, getting early hubris stacks if they go down that route, and, yeah, taking over games. In the case of Graves, I think this pick is kind of underwhelming at the moment. Definitely suffered from like direct nerfs to him and the direct nerfs to Youmu's for range champions. I still think this pick can be fine in the right spots, but he sits as more like a mid B tier option in his current state. Echo got the buff towards his Q not too long ago. It helped him a decent amount, so solidified him as a solid B tier option. In the case of Vi, she's a great lockdown jungler, maybe not a great isolated carry option, but if you are very comfortable playing this pick, then she can definitely be a very solid solo queue option for you. She's obviously very good and competitive at the moment with the power of that point and click CC, which can be a great way of just denying hyper carries within the game. In the case of Shaco, his win rate didn't move because AP Shaco was always the more performant way of playing Shaco, and the buff towards AD Shaco encouraged people to once again try AD Shaco again. It's still underperforming compared to AP Shaco. Not quite to the same extent, but could probably do with a bit more to really find his footing. Shaco, if you go the AP build, I'd still say is maybe like a low A, high B tier option. AD Shaco is more like a low B, C tier option at the moment. Still not quite there in terms of recommendation, but can be an option if you want to play the more aggressive snowbally option, like for this champion. In the case of Zac, he's a pretty skill expressive tank and can definitely take over games compared to some of the other tank options. Is also one of the tanks which translates a bit better into elite play, but not in his best spot at the moment. Definitely suffers from Sunfire's not being a great item at the moment. Karthus is a very, very skillful champion. If you put the time into him, he's still one of the best jungle options in the game. In fact, if you are like an OTP, he is quite possibly the best jungle option in the game, maximizing his clear, his gold income, and then the incredibly powerful ultimate the damage this champion can provide is some of the highest in the game. I would really recommend learning Karthus and just seeing if you like really click with the champion. If you don't, I don't think he is a mandatory pick to have, but he is an incredibly powerful champion to have within your arsenal, and is usually always feared when you can bring him out in a good spot in solo queue. In the case of Trundle, he sits as a high B tier option at the moment. This pick really benefited from his E buff that like enables him to just be an even stronger low elo option. He is a stat checky pick at the end of the day, and into AD matchups and some of the tank matchups can be very powerful. Definitely struggles into the AP matchups and does have clear issues, needing access to the likes of Tiamat to really be functional, but also wanting Trinity as it is his best first item in most situations. Sits as a high B tier option, close to a low A tier option, but not quite there in my opinion at the moment. Shyvana is a great mid to low elo pick, but massively falls off the higher up you go. Kind of akin to Teemo, both these picks are definitely in that kind of boat. Mordekaiser is another one. These picks all perform really well in mid to low MMR brackets. The higher up you go, these picks do underperform quite heavily. They rely on certain aspects of their kit to really find most advantages. Shyvana is her scaling and dragon stacking. Teemo is his shrooms. And in the case of Mordekaiser, being able to just isolate, fight someone, and hoping that you can just be a stat checky juggernaut within the game is kind of the win con of these champions. Jax and Poppy sit towards the high end of the B tier. In the case of Jax, he's a great counterpick to some of the auto attack based champions in the jungle. Not a pick you're going to want to bring out in every game, but definitely as a flex option within your arsenal can be a very effective pick. Same goes for Poppy, another great flex pick, can work support, top and jungle, and the jungle buffs you received more recently really did help her solidify her spot as a B tier jungle option. Moving on to the A tier then, I'm going to lead off with Neferi, who received a pretty hefty hotfix nerf and could honestly be dropped maybe to the B tier in the following patch note video. I will be curious to see just how effective the nerf was. There's a possibility she is just over nerfed for jungle. it takes a while for people to like catch up with things, especially in a hotfix nerf. People aren't going to see that. I mean, Neferi will still be perceived as being overpowered, at least for this patch, maybe even the entirety of the next patch. It's always interesting to see kind of where these things land. I'm telling you right now, though, Neferi does look to be considerably weaker, and I do think she sits as more like a low A tier option at the moment. As people put time into playing her again, though, she can definitely like claw back some of that win rate, but she is still on a decline at the moment, and definitely not quite the same powerhouse of a champion she was at the beginning of this patch and the beginning of last patch. Some of the other A tier options include the likes of Briar, who is also an incredibly mid to low elo skew champion, performs really well in those brackets, and then really fizzles out quite aggressively in Master Plus. Mundo really has risen up as a solid jungle option, quite powerful with the direct buffs he received, combined with like buffs to the likes of Warmogs and yeah, those are like the two main things. Heartsteel is not as great of an item at the moment, but if you can get access to the later levels and just power farm and get access to the levels you want of this champion, this pick is still incredibly powerful and a great tank option within the jungle. Kha'Zix's more recent buffs really helped him. He is a very solid A tier option, probably one of the premier AD assassins in the jungle at the moment. In the case of Master Yi, he received some direct nerfs and like some compensation crit buffs. Crit Yi still looks quite bad. Standard Yi still looks to be a very decent option, still wants an incredibly large amount of gold and XP to really function within the game, but is one of the best resource scaling champions accessible at the moment. Case of Pantheon, he's a great 4-way flex pick option, one of the most flexible champions across the Rift. If you are looking for a pick like that, he is one of the champions I'd very much recommend, but as a standalone jungler, he is a great option. Point and click CC, a pretty decent clear, like very powerful early game. He is a very solid jungler at the moment. Also very powerful ganks if you can get access to some of that gold to kind of give you that kill threat which you are looking for. Diana received direct nerfs. She now sits as more like an A tier pick. Still very powerful once again if you get access to some of that gold, but not going to quite aggressively clear at the same speed she was in the previous patch. In the case of Viego, he is a great AD skirmisher. The rise of Collector Second Viego has really given him a lot of power, and he definitely deserves a high A tier spot with like the shift towards his build. Wukong, still a very performant jungler, not quite as like popular as he was in the previous like pre-nerfs like iterations, but definitely still deserving of an A tier spot at the moment. In the case of Fiddlesticks, he is a great AP option, one of the better AP options which I can recommend at the moment. He has a game-changing ultimate, and if you master his clear, he is an incredibly powerful pick just to have within your arsenal of champions. In the case of Kayn, he has access to both blue and red Kayn. Both look to be pretty strong in the right spots. Like, it really comes down to a lot of comfort. Red Kayn is obviously more low elo, mid elo skewed. In the case of blue Kayn, it's pretty elite skewed. You want to be able to pull off the fast combos and like execute the build correctly. Otherwise, you will find yourself in a pretty rough spot, and not having access to the hard CC, which red does combined with the extended trading patterns, can definitely feel quite punishing. If you're comfortable playing Kayn though, I do think this champion is still in a very solid spot at the moment. Dropping down from the S tier, we have both Gwen and Darius. In the case of Gwen, she probably sits towards the lower end of the A tier as well, alongside Neferi. This champion lost a substantial amount of power within the jungle and is definitely no longer the same powerhouse she was in the previous patch, and even the patch before that when Gwen was kind of like a sleeper OP pick within the jungle. In the case of Darius, he received a direct nerf to his bleed damage to jungle monsters in the previous patch. It was meaningful and it dropped him down to the lower end of the S tier. The direct nerfs to his base armor and his ECD this patch drop him even further. He now sits as more like a mid A tier option. Definitely lost a substantial amount of potency with those changes. Remaining in the A tier is Volibear. He received a direct buff to his AD ratio this patch. On his W, he gained a 15% AD ratio on the second half of that. It's not enough. AD Volibear needs more to really stand on its feet, but the buff towards Roa combined with the rise of Cosmic Volibear have given him a lot of power, and he's still a very solid A tier option. Very easy to understand playstyle and great tower dives, point and click CC, just making him an incredibly valuable pick in his current state. Some of the other champions here then. Let's lead off with Nunu and Amumu. These are like my AP tank jungle recommendations. In the case of Nunu, both tank and AP look to be pretty solid if you can play like pilot them well. The direct buffs to true damage to monsters really helped him as well. He's a very deserving S tier tank option at the moment. In the case of Amumu, probably not to the same extent as Nunu, but very easy to play. Great mid to low MMR option. Has a huge amount of damage within his kit, and the just the ease of playing him, the hard CC makes an incredibly valuable mid elo like climbing pick. He does fall off the higher rank you go, but as a mid elo option, he is a very, very solid pick. The case of Lilia, she sits towards the low end of the S tier now, but direct nerf to her AP ratio as obviously some level of fallback because they went a bit too hard in the previous patch. She still has access to about 2-second cooldown reduction though. The 14 seconds to 12 seconds is meaningful, helps her clear speed, helps her ability to do more damage in fights and look for those pick potentials. She's still a very solid S tier option, just not quite as powerful and is going to have lost some damage compared to where she was at in the previous patch. In the case of Warwick and Java, well actually, I think I'll lead them in, I think this is the correct order. Jarvan, doing really well at the moment. Obviously, the buffs to his Q in the previous patch were massive. Really helped his clear speed. Really helped his ability to find those all-in angles and has really solidified him as a great S tier, easy to play, good autofill jungle option. In the case of Nocturne, his level 6 is one of the most powerful within the game. He's always been a really good S tier option, and this patch, nothing's changed. He's still the same. In the case of Warwick, he's an incredibly mid to low elo skewed champion, which is strange compared to jungle Warwick, which is actually more mid to elite skewed, but still very powerful in low elo. Warwick, jungle, wants to get access to that Tiamat, wants to just kind of uses early game power to like snowball across the map. If you ever find yourself in an extended game, this champion can definitely feel quite punishing, but it's kind of akin to Briar in where his strengths lie, just being able to like stat check most champions in the game and then abusing his mid to low elo skew. Xin Zhao is my recommended pick of the patch if you're looking for something very staple, very cookie cutter. This pick is really doing quite well at the moment. I would recommend trying QMax second. There are like some different build variations floating around. You can do like the Eclipse, the Sundered Sky. Even the Trinity looks really good on him at the moment, and he's definitely really standing out as a very powerful pick. However, if you're looking for what is probably the most powerful pick in the game at the moment, Yorick Jungle stands head and shoulders above everyone else. Even with the hotfix nerf, which came in this morning, I believe, this champion still looks really good. The nerfs probably aren't enough, and he will get nerfed in 24.8, or maybe even hotfixed a third time this patch, which would be crazy to think about. This champion is overloaded. The changes were really, really good for him, and he looks to be the best jungle and best pick in the game at the moment. So definitely try him out. I would recommend abusing him whilst you can. If you're looking for something more stable, though, the Xin Zhao, the Jarvan are still there as good options for you. Those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.